An actress, a musician, a baseball player. These are some pretty grandiose dream careers, more likely to be uttered by a kindergartner in response to the perennial, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" question, than they are by anyone old enough to, say, be saving for retirement. The human ego naturally drives us towards this type of fame and fortune desire because we want to be remembered. We want to have an impact, something for the record books, a mark on history. We want to leave a legacy. In its truest definition, legacy is what we leave behind when our lives are over. Most of us think of it in the way I just described, either some massive monetary endowment or some world-renowned discovery of groundbreaking change. Think Rockefeller, Jonas Salk, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But what about the rest of us? What kind of legacies do ordinary people create? The actress. In her early 20s, Suzanne Fontaine left her Michigan home to make it big as a New York City actress. Coming of age in the 1950s, she picked up small acting roles and worked as a tour guide at NBC Studios, what we now know as 30 Rock. And I'm trying to share my screen, hold on. There we go. Sorry, technical difficulties, thank you for your grace. There's a picture of Sue. She had talent and drive, and she had dreams of fame and fortune, which went by the wayside just a few years later. In her mid-20s, she married, had 2 children, and relocated to suburban Chicago, leaving the glamour of New York City behind. No fame, no fortune, but she sure didn't fade away. Upon relocating to Glen Ellen, before she even turned 30, Sue helped found a community theater, the Village Theater Guild. For nearly 60 years, she gave her heart and her soul to bringing to life hundreds of live theater productions. And I'm just going to read just a little blurb from a tribute that was recently written about her. It says, Sue was a legend of unparalleled accomplishments. She helped found the Village Theater Guild. In 1963, she was influential in locating the one-room schoolhouse that would become their home, instrumental in organizing a lease and later purchase of that property. She was active every year in almost every play in one way or another, directing, acting, stage managing, producing, props, costumes, ushering, several terms on the board of director. She was a brave forerunner, it was written in here, and a driving force. She was also responsible for turning the Village Theater Guild into, and this is a quote, arguably the best community theater in the suburbs, a claim that appeared once in the Chicago Tribune by their then film critic. Pretty impressive. But theater was not the only way that Sue had an impact on things she was doing. Sue was a former Unitarian herself. First time I ever heard of what a Unitarian was from her. As such, she believed unwaveringly in paying her civic rent. She donated hundreds of hours every year towards various non-for-profit organizations. And up until the pandemic took off last year, in her mid-80s, Sue went every Saturday morning, just as she had all of the Saturdays in all the years I'd known her, to volunteer at her local food pantry. She was a frequent volunteer for AIDS organizations, even serving as a mentor for several years to 3 children whose mother was dying from the disease. 2 months ago, Sue had a stroke, and after a series of complications, she died less than 2 weeks ago. She never became a famous star on Broadway. Divorcing in her 40s, having her children grown and flown, she stayed in Glen Ellen for the rest of her life. She worked in as an administrative position with a local law firm and lived modestly in a rented 3-floor walk-up. And she died without any giant endowment of monetary riches to bequeath. What's her legacy? Our friendship began when I was a newlywed in my mid-20s, and although she was a generation older than me, Without question, Sue was one of the most influential people in my life. She taught me about theater, of course, but also about books, politics, wine, entertaining on a budget, parenting, grandparenting, parenting of adult children, fashion, friendship, forgiveness, grace, lipstick. She never went anywhere without lipstick. And the art of a well-placed curse word. I could go on for hours about the lessons I've gained from knowing Sue, and I know that I am by far not the only one who feels this way. Some of you are even listening to me. Sue kept a framed quote by an actress named Elsie DeWolf in her study that read simply, "I want to make everything around me beautiful. That will be my life." The Musician. One of my favorite movies, Mr. Holland's Opus. The title character begrudgingly becomes a school teacher when what he really wants to do is write the symphony of all symphonies. A piece of music so impactful that it lives forever, like that of the great composers who came before him. Spoiler alert, although to be fair, this movie did come out 20 years ago, so if you haven't seen it yet, I'm sorry. Mr. Holland never finishes that symphony. He stays teaching in the same high school for his entire career, frustrated not only at his inability to connect with or influence his students, but also at his failure to complete his opus. And in the movie's penultimate scene, just when he thinks he has failed to achieve his life's goals, a gaggle of his former students come back to play for him his unfinished symphony. He's able to see the impact he had on 3 generations of students, what they have achieved, where they've gone. He sees his legacy. Now here's someone, although fictional, could be any one of us, who spends his life believing he's squandering any hope of lasting impact, only to learn that this is not the case at all. The tagline from that movie, from the beloved John Lennon song, "Beautiful Boy," reads, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." In the end, it wasn't anything grand that Mr. Holland did, but rather the little impacts he made on the people who were privileged to know him. The baseballer. The 2014 Westdale Tigers was a little league team made up of 9 and 10-year-olds from North Lake, Illinois. Located just south of Chicago's O'Hare Airport, North Lake is an industrial blue-collar community comprised primarily of first and second generation Americans. Many of the adults that are employed in one of the manufacturing facilities in the area. And disposable income and free time are not ample. As such, youth sports opportunities are not widespread. But there are some dedicated volunteers who have seen to it that their Little League baseball program remains strong, a healthy, positive outlet for the youth in that community. One volunteer was a man named Ray Greer. Coach Ray, as he had been known for over 25 years, grew up in North Lake. He played on the Westdale Baseball League as a little boy. Ray's philosophy was that every kid, regardless of economics, should have an opportunity to experience the benefits youth sports offer. And as such, after he finished college, he returned to his hometown and began a coaching career that went over 25 years. His focus wasn't on winning as much as it was on growth and confidence boosting, character development, and of course, love of the game. The 2014 season started out a little rough for the Tigers. Think Bad News Bears. The players were mostly inexperienced and they lacked confidence. They were discouraged and disgruntled. So Coach Ray developed a detailed plan for each practice and each game to work on each individual player's growth areas, both on and off the field. By the time they got a few games under their belt, the Tigers started to mesh. They started to win. More than that, though, they started to have fun. Coach Ray got text messages after practices that said things like, "Thank you so much for tonight. Ricky came home exhausted and smiling. We've never seen him this excited about anything before." He shared those texts with friends and told them that this was a special team, one that would stand out in his career. He poured all of himself into that team, determined to get them where they needed to be. It was odd then when Coach Ray didn't show up for practice one Saturday morning. He was never late for practice. But when all the kids arrived at the field, there was no sign of him. And a few hours later, worst fears were confirmed. While getting ready for practice that morning, Coach Ray suffered an aortic rupture and died in his home. He was 48 years old. Shockwaves passed through every parent on that team. What were they going to say to their children? Who was going to coach the team now? What would happen next? The parents came together and agreed it was important for those kids to get back out there. And so a dad with no coaching experience and very little knowledge of baseball stepped in to lead this team. The following Tuesday, just 3 days after Coach Ray's death, the Tigers took the field. Before the game started, the kids were told that coaching them had been one of the greatest joys of his life. And more than anything, he would want them to go out there, try their best, be good sports, and have fun. And they did. The Tigers won their game that night. Lots of cheers and tears from both sides. The season went on in so-so fashion. The Tigers won some, they lost some. Whenever they were down, their new coach, Coach Alyce, reminded them of the lessons that Coach Ray had imparted on them. Do your best, try hard, have fun. They ended the season with just enough wins to squeak into the final playoff spot with the lowest seed in the tournament, which required them, of course, to take on the #1 team. The Tigers were on fire that night, and they eliminated the first place team in an upset. They then went on to win their next 2 games and found themselves quite unexpectedly in the Westdale Little League Championship game. That night, the game was tied 1-1 going into the final inning. And their last at bat, the Tigers scored 1 run and went into the bottom of the final inning up 2-1. Nerves were mounting. A couple players got on base. With 2 outs and runners on first and third, the Tiger pitcher struck out the batter to win the championship. According to a local newspaper, the scene could only be described as pandemonium. The team took to the field in tears, hoisting their trophies toward the sky in honor of the coach who helped them win the game, and in honor of the coach who helped get them there. An honorary patch was created for the players to wear in that game. I understand many of them still wear that today. 7 years later, the 2014 Tigers are now young men and women getting ready to finish high school. But you can bet they will never forget that summer. They'll tell the story. Some of them will tell it as college students sitting around a dorm room. Others will share it over an intimate dinner with a fiance. Some will relive it in their own children in the car on their way to practice. And maybe, just maybe, some will share it as they begin volunteer coaching their own team someday. Legacy. There are some grand ones, to be sure. The historical footprint left behind by the likes of Lincoln, Salk, Gandhi, Gutenberg, Einstein, Bader Ginsburg, Obama, Harris, they're significant, of course. But are the legacies created by the ordinary any less extraordinary? We can all be pretty confident Kamala Harris is going to leave a massive historical legacy, cracking a glass ceiling that has been in existence the entire history of our country. But will the legacy of the playground that she and her sister created as kids be any less substantial? Is the legacy, the candle lit by Sue Keenan, any less significant than the one ignited by Shakespeare? The symphony started by Mr. Holland any less sweet sounding than the ones completed by Mozart? Are the game plans drafted by Coach Ray Greer any less strategic than the ones created by Coach John Wooden? For those directly impacted by these people, I'd say no. Because that's the thing about legacies. They aren't objective. They aren't about numbers. They're about the impact that they have on each of us. And more so, what we choose to do with them. I feel pretty safe in saying that neither the actress, the musician, or the baseball player envisioned their lives going the way that they went. I can't speak for the fictional Mr. Holland, but I can say with confidence that neither Sue Keenan nor Ray Greer placed a tremendous emphasis on financial wealth. Sue lived out her final years on Social Security and the generosity of friends. And Coach Ray, my brother, died penniless, living in our mother's house. But what each of them left behind is a legacy that cannot be quantified by material wealth. An enduring impact on the communities in which they lived and on the lives of those they knew. They planted seeds in gardens that they will not see. The burden then, it seems, is on us. It's on us to cultivate those seeds and help them continue to grow. Herein lies the perpetual cycle, because, and this is the really mind-blowing thing, each of those people had their own heroes. Sue Keenan had her heroes, and Mr. Holland did, I'm sure, and Ray Greer had his heroes, and those heroes had heroes who came before them and influenced them, and so on and so on and so on. That is the true secret of legacy. It isn't so much what we leave behind, but what we choose to do with what is left to our care. So I challenge you now to think about your legacy. What are you going to leave behind? But more importantly, what are you going to do with that which was left to you? What kind of steward will you be with the legacies bequeathed by those who came before? It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be.